We all know what it's like to pull up to a parking lot only to realize there's no spots left. It is super frustrating, and it always makes you wish there was just a little bit more parking. In fact, you often hear people complain about a parking shortage in lots of American cities. Have you ever stopped to wonder how much parking there actually is? Take a guess. There's around 280 million cars in the United States, so how many parking spots have we built for them? If you're feeling brave, you can comment your guess before you hear the answer. Are you ready? Well, it turns out the US government doesn't actually keep track of parking. But the best estimates we have are that there's upwards of 2 billion parking spots in the United States, which is about 7 spots for every one car. Even if those estimates are wildly off, that is still many times more spots than we could possibly use at once. Now, to be fair, the US population is not spread out evenly. America is a big place, but most people live in a small number of cities. So maybe there's just a parking shortage in the cities, right? Well, most cities also don't keep track of their parking numbers, but we did have one parking inventory for a couple cities back in 2018. Let's look at what they found. The study looked at New York, Philadelphia, Seattle, Des Moines, and Jackson. New York was the only city that had less parking spots than homes, but the other four had several times more parking than they could possibly use. On the lower end, you had Seattle with only 5 spots per home, which still seems like a lot. And on the extreme side, you've got Jackson, Wyoming, with 27 spots per home, which seems completely crazy. In fact, the study found that almost 40% of Jackson's total land was just parking. Except for New York, which obviously is super unique among US cities, we have many times more parking spaces than we could ever use at once. So why does it always feel like there's never enough parking? Well, that's what we're going to find out. So in order to understand how many spots we should build for a city, we need to understand a little bit about how the parking supply works. We do have way more parking spaces than we could possibly use, but the demand for those spaces isn't evenly spread out, right? Everybody wants to go to work at the same time, and then go shopping at the same time, and then go home at the same time. It's a little confusing, so let's use an example. Here in our fake town, we have 100 people. Let's say 70% of them drive, and the rest walk, rideshare, carpool, or take transit. On the weekdays, everybody goes to work. After work, half the people go to a restaurant, half the people go to a grocery store. Everybody goes home at night. On the weekend, half of them go to church. Our goal is to make sure that everybody gets a spot right in front of their destination with no waiting. So how much parking do we need? We need at least 245 spots to meet that peak demand, although in real life you'd probably want to add another 20% just to be safe. You can already see why this is tricky. We only have 70 cars in our town, so they can only use 70 spots, but we have to have 245 just to avoid the backup. Now let's say our town is doing well and it grows to 200 people. The residents want more parking, so we have to figure out how much to build. The town decides to double the parking, adding another 245 spots to account for the doubled population. While they're at it, they widen the roads and expand the intersections. But the trick is that by building more parking, we've forced everything to be a little bit more spread out. Walking is getting harder, transit is slower, and it gets stuck in traffic. And there's less incentive to carpool now that parking is even easier to find. So the percentage of people who drive increases from 70% to say 90%. Now we need 630 spots, that's an additional 140, just to keep our original level of parking availability. You can see where this is going, right? What would happen if we added another round of parking lots? We'd increase the demand even more, and we'd have to build even more parking. So we still haven't answered our original question. How much parking should we build? What is the actual solution? And the answer is that you can never build enough parking, because the more parking you build, the more you need. Building bigger parking lots will work okay in small towns, but as a city gets larger, it reaches the point where parking can never expand enough to meet the demand. Now, obviously our town here is simplified to illustrate the point, so let's look at some real-life cities to compare. Let's compare the parking history of LA and San Francisco, two big coastal cities in the same state, to see how things turned out. Before World War I, cars were a novelty, and people kind of just parked wherever they felt like. But in 1908, the Model T shipped, and parking starts to become a big urban issue. The cities start to set time limits on curb parking, but it's tough to enforce because we hadn't invented parking meters yet. The cities start to get gridlocked. Now let's look at how LA and San Francisco handled the problem differently. We'll start with LA. In the early 1900s, LA had an extensive streetcar system. In fact, it was one of the largest on the planet at the time. But by 1920, LA also had the highest rate of car ownership on the planet. They banned street parking, which sped traffic up by 50%, but there was so much backlash that they reversed the policy after 3 weeks. They decided to find another way. By 1935, LA had established residential parking minimums, 1 spot per unit. That meant that no more homes or apartments could be built unless they had at least that much parking. By 46, LA required off-street parking to be provided for commercial buildings too, like stores or restaurants. That meant that every business needed to provide its own parking lot. By this point, you start to see the design of LA's buildings changing. Here you can see the famous Millerons department store, built in 49, which decided to put all of its parking on the roof. And you start to see residential construction change too. The dingbat style of buildings becomes popular because you can squeeze those extra spots in. By the mid-60s, most of LA's downtown rail network had been demolished. By the end of the 90s, the parking and zoning requirements were so severe that it would now be illegal to build most of the city's famous neighborhoods, like Hollywood, Koreatown, or Mid-City. All of those areas wouldn't have enough parking to meet the modern requirements. By 1999, downtown LA is not doing great. The city decides to relax the parking requirements in that downtown area so that developers can build without having to worry about the parking. It's a huge success. Downtown gets revitalized, and thousands of new units get built within 10 years. By 2020, the population of downtown is triple what it was in 99. But the rest of LA is mostly unchanged. It is insanely car dependent. Today, LA has about 18 million parking spaces for its 3.8 million residents, about 5 spots per person. If we put the parking lots of LA into one space, it would take up 200 square miles. And outside of the downtown core, LA is almost completely unusable without a car, and it is famous around the world for its terrible traffic. So now let's rewind back to 1900 and see how California's other big city handled the parking situation. So like LA, San Francisco had an extensive trolley and cable car network in the early 1900s. During World War II, San Francisco becomes a major hub for the military. The shipyards in the Bay Area managed to produce 1,400 ships during the war, and it takes a lot of people to do that. So as the population increased to support the war effort, traffic congestion started to become worse and worse. Traffic on the Bay Bridge, which connects San Francisco and Oakland, was so severe that an Army-Navy task force was created. They decided that we need a new underwater tunnel to supplement the bridge. In 1955, San Francisco established residential parking requirements for home units, similar to LA. That same year, the famous freeway revolts happened, which blocked construction of new freeway infrastructure downtown. In 1957, San Francisco officially started the planning process for BART. In 1960, they added additional requirements for commercial and industrial parking, but made some exceptions for the downtown commercial districts. In 1968, San Francisco changed the laws to require special permission to build more than 150% of the minimum parking. In effect, this set a sort of maximum parking limit, although it was still pretty generous. A lot happens in the 1970s. During the oil crisis, San Francisco formally adopts its transit-first policy. BART starts its opening in 1972. In 1974, the Transbay Tube is completed, connecting the two halves of the BART system. In 1980, the Muni Metro opens for passenger service, replacing the older streetcar system. In 1985, San Francisco eliminates parking minimums for the downtown area and sets a maximum parking in offices at 7% of the floor area. The maximum parking for residential is also lowered to 1 space for every 4 units. In 2011, the SF Park program begins with the goal of making street parking available through meter price adjustments. The program is a huge success, and the time spent searching for parking decreases by more than 40%. By 2015, nearly all the zoning in San Francisco had been reformed to either have no parking minimums or have an easy exception process. And by 2018, San Francisco eliminated the final parking minimums across the entire city. Today, San Francisco has about 600,000 parking spaces for its 800,000 residents, or 0.75 spots per person. Most of the city is walkable, and the whole city is easily accessible through public transit. About a third of the residents don't even own a car, and only about 26% drive themselves to work. Hopefully you can see the difference here. Parking policy choices are why LA's Dodger Stadium looks like this, and San Francisco's Oracle Park looks like this. Fun fact, there's actually boat parking behind Oracle Park, which doesn't really matter, but I think it's kind of funny. LA is the most infamous example here, but most US cities fall into this same pattern. And San Francisco still has too much parking. For reference, Paris has about the same amount of parking for more than double the population, and they're still planning on cutting down parking more. You can see what percentage of the downtown area of US cities is taken up by parking. And there's a clear trend here. The downtowns that people actually like Philadelphia, DC, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, don't have that much parking. If it was just a matter of traffic, this wouldn't be quite so bad. But unfortunately, excessive parking has a lot of negative impacts that aren't as obvious. A big one for the United States is that parking dramatically increases the cost of construction. The typical cost of a parking structure is at least $20,000 per spot, but $40,000 to $60,000 is more common in American cities. And moving those spots underground will usually double that cost. So if your business needs a garage with 100 spots, your construction costs are probably going to go up by at least $2 to $6 million for the parking. And those costs are going to get passed on to the customers. This is especially bad for housing, where those higher costs turn into higher rent. In general, a ballpark rule is that $10,000 of construction cost adds about $100 in rent. So those extra 100 spots translate into like $200 to $600 higher rent. The US is in the middle of a housing crisis right now, so we really want rents to be going the opposite direction. Second, parking destroys urban wealth and makes cities financially unsustainable. The cost to operate a city increases dramatically as you spread things out more. The cost to city to things like sidewalks, plumbing, electricity, and transportation go way up as you spread things out. But the income the city gains back from property taxes don't go up, because the income is coming from the useful land, not the parking lots and the roads. Here's an example. This Walmart in Grand Rapids is worth $10.4 million. The building and its gigantic parking lot take up 156 acres. So its value to the city is about $12.60 per square foot. Down the road, there's this cute little art gallery called Frame Up. It's only worth $68,000, but it just needs a tiny bit of space, so it's worth $37 per square foot. In other words, it's 3 times as valuable as the Walmart for the land that it uses. If the city replaced that Walmart with smaller, denser stores like Frame Up, that same land will be worth $20 million more, and the city can bring in that much more revenue. The problem here is that parking lots don't contribute to the economy. They're not generating revenue. The valuable land is the places that people actually want to go, not the parking lots they dump their cars in. The more of your city is parking and roads, the less financially sustainable your city will be. Third, parking is really bad for the environment. Cement on its own is responsible for 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and parking and roads are a big part of that. And of course, having more parking increases our car dependency, and cars produce a crazy amount of emissions. Transportation accounts for at least 20% of global emissions, and cars represent about 75% of those. That's why walkable cities always produce less carbon than car-dependent ones. And if climate change is a little too abstract for you, there are more direct concerns too. The car dependency that's caused by parking lots is terrible for air pollution. LA has the worst air pollution in the entire United States, and that's because of the cars. Globally, vehicle pollution causes 4 million new cases of childhood asthma per year. Even if we're just considering the US, car pollution is still responsible for a quarter of all childhood asthma cases. And it's not just pollution either. Parking lots absorb and retain heat and make the cities heat up faster and cool down slower. They don't absorb water, which causes flooding during storms. There's all kinds of impacts like this, but we'd be here all day if I tried to list them all. And finally, the parking lot space could just be used for better things. These gigantic empty lots could be farmers markets, parks, playgrounds, basketball courts. Street parking can become bike lanes, bus lanes, outdoor dining, walking paths, trees, or just bigger sidewalks. Think of a bus lane in a busy city, for example. Which is a better use of space? Parking spots that will help a couple of people every day, or a bus lane that will help tens of thousands of people get to work on time? Land in cities is really valuable, and using it for excessive parking is a waste. Luckily, it's not all doom and gloom. There are things we can do to help here, and the US is already making some progress. To reiterate, this video and the solutions here are for cities, the places where almost everyone lives. It doesn't really matter how much parking you have out in your farm in the middle of nowhere. I don't care. Okay, number 1. The United States should eliminate all parking minimums nationwide, particularly for housing. In their core downtown areas, cities should enact parking maximums. We always say that America is the land of the free, so why are we forcing developers to build these expensive parking lots when they don't want to and they're bad for the city? If developers would rather have a smaller lot, or they'd rather use their space for a bigger building, why not let them? Maybe they'll be wrong and they won't have enough parking, but opening a business is a gamble and they're the ones taking the risk. We've made some good progress on this front already. Hundreds of US cities have already eliminated parking mandates in their downtown cores, but many cities haven't eliminated them completely, and that's what needs to happen. Number 2, we need to unbundle the cost of parking from the cost of housing. Right now, most apartments in the United States will include parking for free, but of course, it's not actually free, right? It's just included in the rent. Instead, we should unbundle the housing cost from the parking cost so that it's two separate purchases that you can choose to make. This is a win for everybody. People who want the parking can continue to pay for it, and the people who don't can save a couple $100s. The apartment complex is better off too. They don't need to waste money and space building parking spots that wouldn't be used anyways. And the city's better off too because now more people can afford housing. And I totally get it. You might not want to live in an apartment with no parking, and that's fine. But there's lots of people who would like that. When LA fixed its downtown parking requirements back in '99, one of the developers was asked if he thought LA residents would really be willing to live somewhere without parking. He said, "I don't need everybody, I just need to fill this building." 10 million people lived in LA County. It's not that hard to find 100 that didn't want a parking spot. Number 3, cities should adjust the prices of their parking meters so that there's always some space available, but not too much. We need a bit of a mentality shift here. Parking meters are not a way for the city to earn money. If they wanted to do that, they can just raise taxes. Parking meters are a way to ration a limited resource. San Francisco tried this back in 2011 and had a lot of success. If parking on a street was more than 80% full for a couple weeks, the city would raise the meter price by 25 cents. And if the parking was under 60% full, the price would be lowered 25 cents. By the end of the project, it was much easier to find parking. In fact, the time that people spent searching for parking went down by 43%. Okay, number 4, and this is the tougher one. We really need to fund public transit and fix our zoning codes to allow for mixed-use walkable neighborhoods. This is the big one, and there's really no way around this. As we have seen in many, many American cities, car infrastructure does not scale as cities grow. We can never build enough parking to get away from this problem. Some cities have tried that, and they just end up like LA, with horrible traffic and pollution and still not enough parking. American cities need to stop operating like they are suburbs. They need to update their zoning codes to allow denser and mixed-use construction. And I get it, not everybody wants to live in a dense, walkable area. That's fine. The other 99% of America would be perfect for those people. But it's not okay to use a personal preference to block everyone else from building densely in our downtown areas, especially when it's better for safety and the environment and people's health and happiness. America loves presenting itself as the land of the free, a country full of rugged individualism that hates government handouts. But for whatever reason, parking and driving is the one thing the US does socialize the cost of. We've decided that free parking and cheap gas are rights, and we have raised the cost of almost everything else to make sure that everybody gets their parking spot. Think of all the things that the US doesn't socialize the cost of: housing, healthcare, food, tuition, right? Like, these are all things the US makes you pay for on your own. Why is parking the one thing that we're okay with socializing the costs of, especially when it's terrible for our cities and our health? 50 years after the Model T, the famous sociologist Lewis Mumford published his book, The City in History, where he argued that cities should be designed to be in balance with technology instead of being dominated by it. Over those last 50 years, Americans saw their cities completely transform, tearing out their transit networks and bending over backwards to accommodate as many personal vehicles as possible. And there's a quote in this book that sums up the situation pretty well. "The right to access every building in a city by private car when everyone possesses such a vehicle is actually the right to destroy the city." And I think that's the problem that we've got now. If a couple of people need to park, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. But if everybody needs to park in front of every building, it's a disaster. You have to pave more and more of your land until your city is a concrete jungle and there's nothing left of value. We don't need to tear down every parking lot tomorrow. US cities are car dependent, and they will be for a long time. But the point here is that if your city has a parking shortage, the solution is almost never to build more parking. The only solution here is to reduce our car dependency. It's time for us to join the rest of the developed world and let our cities grow naturally, instead of forcing them to cater to the car. And if we can achieve that, you might find yourself a lot less worried about finding a spot the next time you go to the store.